Ambassador Kalen Vex of the Helios Accord did not breathe, not in the way the carbon-based delegates did. His consciousness was a symphony of magnetic fields, a silent, humming existence that resonated with the station's artificial gravity generators. To him, the sterile, chrome-plated halls of the neutral station were a cacophony of chaotic, vibrating metal. He was here for one reason: to witness the end. The Centauri ascendancy, his people, had been at war with the Terrans for 312 years. It was a war of attrition, a war of patience, a war of infinite lifespans against fleeting, violent ones. And they were winning. The Terran Confederacy was a dying star, its light fading. Today, on this station, they would formally surrender. The final treaty would be signed, and the long, slow process of Terran absorption would begin. Kalen observed the humans with a detached curiosity. They moved with a frantic energy, their short lives a blur of motion. They were loud, their laughter grating, their arguments illogical and passionate. He watched a human diplomat, a man named Elias Vance, stumble slightly, his hand flailing out to steady himself on a bulkhead. The sheer physicality of it, the potential for such clumsy, violent impact, was alien to Kalen's fluid form. He noted the way Vance's eyes, a startling shade of blue, scanned the room with a mixture of exhaustion and a defiant sort of cheer. It was the look of a cornered animal, not a defeated one, and it unsettled Kalen more than any fleet of warships ever could. Elias Vance adjusted the collar of his dress uniform, the starched fabric scratching at his neck. 300 years of war, and this was the end. A surrender. The thought tasted like ash in his mouth. He'd lost friends, family, entire colonies to the Helios Accord. They were beings of pure magnetism, living in the coronas of stars, and they saw his entire species as a temporary, noisy infestation. To them, this wasn't a negotiation. It was an extermination order being finalized. He saw Ambassador Vex across the chamber, a shimmering, humanoid distortion in the air, flanked by his silent, unmoving guards. They were beautiful in their own way, like northern lights given sentience. But they were cold. Utterly, terrifyingly cold. Elias's orders were clear: sign the treaty, accept the terms, and hope for the best. The Confederacy couldn't fight them anymore. Their fleets were scrap, their worlds were glassed. But as he looked around at the other delegates, other species who had already surrendered, their faces hollow with resignation, a familiar, stubborn heat began to build in his chest. It wasn't hope. It was something else. Something older. Something that had kept his ancestors fighting long after any logical being would have given up. He straightened his back, ignoring the phantom pains of old injuries, and walked toward the negotiation table. He was going to sign his species' death warrant, and he was going to do it with a smile they wouldn't be able to read. The summit hall was a masterpiece of compromise. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and recycled oxygen. The lighting was a neutral white, designed to be non-threatening to all species, though it made Elias's skin feel pale and ghostly. The table itself was a circular platform of polished obsidian, hovering a few centimeters off the floor. Ambassador Vex took his position at the table, his form rippling as if viewed through heat haze. Ambassador Vance. Vex's voice resonated directly in Elias's mind, a smooth, synthetic telepathic projection. We are pleased you could join us for the inevitable conclusion of this unfortunate conflict. Elias felt a spike of anger. He forced his expression into a neutral mask. Ambassador Vex, it's an honor to be here. The words felt like stones in his mouth. He sat, the chair cool beneath him. Before him, a holographic projector displayed the treaty text. It was simple. The Terran Confederacy would dissolve its military, cede all remaining colonies, and its citizens would be integrated into the Helios Accord as protected wards, a kinder term for slaves. Elias's finger hovered over the digital acceptance pad. This was it, the end of the line. He thought of his daughter, Sarah, back on Mars, waiting for him. He thought of the billions who had died. And in that moment, the heat in his chest flared into something white-hot and irrational. He couldn't just sign. Not like this. Not with this thing looking down on him. He needed to leave a mark. Something they wouldn't expect. Kalen observed the human. The emotional radiation emanating from Elias Vance was a fascinating, if unpleasant, spectrum. Fear, yes. Resignation, certainly. But beneath it all, a current of defiance so potent it was almost visible. Kalen had studied Terran psychology for centuries. They were an enigma. Their ability to embrace illogical, self-destructive behavior was their only notable survival trait. They would throw away their own lives for abstract concepts like honor or freedom. They would fight a war they couldn't win simply because the alternative was unthinkable. Kalen found it inefficient and baffling. Now, as the human hovered his finger over the acceptance pad, Kalen could feel the emotional temperature rising. Vance was not about to comply. He was about to do something stupid, something that would delay the inevitable, perhaps by a few hours, but ultimately change nothing. Kalen was prepared for it. He had seen this play out a dozen times with other species. A final, pointless gesture of defiance. He allowed a flicker of impatience to enter his mental projection. The treaty awaits your signature, Ambassador. The galaxy is weary of your conflict. He watched Vance's jaw tighten. The human was looking past the treaty, past Kalen, at something else on the table. Kalen followed his gaze. It was a small, innocuous object. A trinket. A smooth, river rock that Vance had apparently carried with him. It was a primitive, sentimental object. Kalen dismissed it. It was irrelevant. A distraction. Elias's eyes weren't on the treaty. They were on the river rock in his pocket. It was a stupid thing, a piece of earth he'd carried with him for 20 years. A reminder of a world he'd never really known, a time before the war. He'd planned to leave it here, on the table, after he signed. A final, silent message. But now, looking at Ambassador Vex's smug, telepathic projection, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Signing the treaty felt like giving the rock away, and he wasn't ready to give up anything. His fingers closed around the smooth, cool stone in his pocket. It felt solid, real, unlike the shimmering lie of the Helios Accord. An idea, born of pure spite and a lifetime of frustration, sparked in his mind. It was insane. It was reckless. It was so profoundly, beautifully human. He subtly palmed the rock, his movements hidden by the table's edge. He watched Vex, saw the alien's focus locked on the acceptance pad. This was his chance. He stood up abruptly, a move so sudden it made the other delegates jump. "My apologies, Ambassador," Elias said, his voice loud and boisterous. A bit of a nervous habit. He began to juggle the river rock, tossing it from hand to hand with a clumsy, practiced ease. It was a party trick he used to disarm tense situations back home. He saw Vex's mental projection flicker with confusion. The alien couldn't comprehend the pointless, physical display. Elias grinned, a wide, reckless grin. "Can't sit still," he chuckled. "Mind if I stretch my legs?" He began to walk around the table, the rock a blur in his hands. The delegates from other species watched in stunned silence. The Helios guards shifted their stances, their magnetic fields humming with low-level tension. Elias didn't care. He was in his own world now, a world of motion and noise and defiance. Kalen was experiencing a cascade of computational errors. The human was juggling, a primitive, inefficient act of manual dexterity. It served no purpose. It conveyed no information. It was, by every metric, a waste of energy. And yet, Vance was doing it with a focus that bordered on fanaticism. Kalen tried to analyze the behavior. Was it a coded message? A species-specific mating ritual? A pre-surrender seizure? The data was insufficient. The emotional output from Vance was a maelstrom. The primary emotion was still defiance, but it was now laced with something else. A kind of manic glee. It was baffling. The human was about to sign his species' death warrant, and he was playing with a rock. Kalen's focus wavered for a fraction of a second, a micro-stutter in his consciousness as he attempted to recalibrate his model of Terran behavior. It was in that moment of distraction that the accident happened. Vance, in a particularly wild toss, lost his grip. The river rock, spinning end over end, flew through the air. It was an insignificant object. It should have clattered harmlessly to the floor, but it didn't. It was aimed directly at the central holographic projector. Kalen saw it too late. A surge of pure, unadulterated panic shot through him. No, the telepathic shout was raw, uncontrolled. He lashed out with his own magnetic field, a desperate attempt to deflect the rock. But it was too late. The rock struck the projector. The impact was not loud. It was a sickening crunch of shattering crystal, followed by a high-pitched whine of dying machinery. But the effect was catastrophic. The holographic projector, which was not merely displaying an image but was actively modulating the station's localized gravity field to keep the negotiation table aloft, overloaded. A wave of pure, uncontrolled energy erupted from it. It wasn't an explosion in the traditional sense. It was a spatial distortion. The air in the center of the hall seemed to tear, shimmering like a heat mirage on a desert planet. For a second, everything was silent. Then came the sound, a low, guttural groan of stressed metal. The floor buckled. The walls, designed to withstand a direct meteorite strike, warped inward. The lights flickered and died, plunging the room into an emergency red glow. Delegates screamed, not the high-pitched, panicked shrieks of humans, but the low, resonant moans of other species. The Helios guards, caught in the initial blast of spatial energy, dissolved into wisps of magnetism that were instantly snuffed out by the station's failing atmosphere. Elias Vance was thrown back by the shockwave, his head striking the obsidian table with a sickening thud. The world went black. Kalen's consciousness was scattered. He was a being of magnetic fields, and the spatial distortion had been like a sonic grenade thrown into his very being. He felt his sense of self splintering, his form flickering in and out of coherence. He could sense chaos, panic. The station's life support systems were failing, venting atmosphere into the void. The gravity was fluctuating wildly. He could feel the minds of the other delegates, a panicked chorus of fear and pain. And then he felt the human, Elias Vance. He was still alive, barely. Kalen's fractured consciousness latched onto him, a desperate anchor in the sea of entropy. He could feel the human's blood, the frantic beat of his heart, the oxygen-starved panic flooding his primitive brain. It was a raw, primal sensation. And it was familiar. He had felt this before. In the moments before a Terran ship rammed a Helios dreadnought. In the split second before a lone soldier detonated a grenade in a crowded command center. It was the same defiant, illogical refusal to simply die. It was the Terran way, and it was now coursing through Kalen's own destabilized form. He reformed, pulling his scattered consciousness together with a force of will that bordered on agony. He had to get out. He had to survive. The treaty was gone. The war was different now. Elias's head throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that was quickly overshadowed by the burning in his lungs. The air was thin, tasting of ozone and burnt wiring. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. The hall was a wreck. The obsidian table was cracked, the holographic projector a pile of useless junk. Delegates were on the floor, some groaning, others ominously still. The Helios guards were gone, vanished. He saw Ambassador Vex, shimmering violently, struggling to maintain his form. The alien looked at him, and for the first time, Elias didn't see cold, superior contempt. He saw something else. Fear. Raw, unadulterated fear. It was a look he knew well. He saw it in the mirror every morning. The station was dying. The bulkheads were groaning, stressed to their limits. A hull breach was imminent. Elias didn't think. He acted. Years of military training and pure, dumb instinct took over. He scrambled across the wreckage, grabbing a loose piece of metal conduit. He saw a sparking wire near a damaged junction box. It was a crazy, suicidal idea, but it was the only one he had. "Hey, Sparky," he yelled, his voice hoarse. He slammed the conduit against the junction box, causing a shower of sparks. The surge of electricity was wild, uncontrolled. It arced through the air, a jagged blue line of death. It struck Ambassador Vex dead center. The alien let out a silent, mental scream of pure agony as his form destabilized completely, dissolving into a cloud of chaotic magnetism that was instantly shorted out by the ambient energy. The effect was instantaneous. The spatial distortion in the center of the room vanished. The groaning of the metal stopped. The air began to stabilize. The silence that followed was more profound than any scream. Elias leaned against the bulkhead, gasping for air, the conduit clattering to the floor. He had done it. He had killed the ambassador. He had saved the station. He looked around. The other delegates were stirring, pushing themselves up, staring at him with a mixture of awe and terror. The immediate threat was over. The station was still crippled, but it wasn't tearing itself apart anymore. And the Helios Accord's representative was gone. A voice crackled over the station's emergency comm system, weak and distorted. This is Station Command. All delegates, report to the emergency evacuation pods. Repeat, all delegates, evacuate immediately. The evacuation would be chaotic, a mad scramble for survival. And in the middle of it all was Elias Vance, the man who had single-handedly, accidentally, won the war. He looked down at his hands, still trembling. He hadn't meant to do any of this. He hadn't meant to start a fight. He hadn't meant to win. He had just been a man with a rock, a lifetime of anger, and a desperate, irrational need to be seen. He had turned their superweapon, their very reality, into a party trick. And in doing so, he had broken them. Not with a grand strategy or a superior weapon, but with a clumsy, spiteful gesture. The war was over, and the humans had won. He just wished he felt like a victor. All he felt was the cold, hollow ache of a man who had just signed his own name on a ruin.